Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the First Intelligence podcast. Today is Thursday, July 24, 2025. I hope you like our new YouTube channel, Nextsite Intelligence. If you're looking for a swift, comprehensive understanding of critical global developments, well, you've definitely landed in the right spot. We're about to custom tailor a deep dive into some vital insights from Nextsite's latest intelligence brief. This one's for Wednesday, July 23rd.
And our source for this deep dive, as you mentioned, is Nextsite. They're an exceptional intelligence company, really specializing in global intelligence. And they have a particular focus on developing their own cutting-edge open source intelligence platforms, OSINT. Their mission is truly compelling, basically empowering investigators worldwide and providing these highly detailed, customized intelligence reports to their clients. If what we discussed today sparks your curiosity, I highly recommend checking out their website. It's www.nextarchive.com. Lots more insights and information there.
Absolutely. Think of this as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We'll try to find some surprising facts, maybe a little humor to keep you hooked. Our mission today, really, is to distill the most important nuggets of knowledge from this intelligence report. We want to make sure you're completely up to speed on the critical global developments shaping our world. We're kind of your guides here, helping you understand what truly matters in the sources you've shared.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating about these daily reports is how they synthesize such diverse information, spot these hidden patterns, and really connect the dots for us in ways you might not expect. We'll not just cover what happened, but really delve into why it matters, providing that broader context and the implications. The report itself uses a unique classification system, and understanding its framework, specifically the threat level, source reliability, and information confidence flags, is how you, our listener, can truly grasp the weight and urgency of each piece of intelligence.
Exactly. And let's quickly unpack what those indicators mean so you can interpret the intelligence right alongside us. It's pretty straightforward once you get the hang of it. The threat level uses a UK-based system, and it has these plus or minus modifiers. It ranges from low, meaning an event is highly unlikely, all the way up to critical, where it's expected imminently. In between, you'll hear things like moderate, possible, but not likely, moderate plus. Moderate means increasing indicators are pointing towards it. Substantial means an event is likely. Substantial suggests a slightly receding risk. Severe is highly likely, and severe plus means it's approaching critical imminence.
Right. Then we have source reliability. This follows the Admiralty AF scale, pretty standard in intel circles. A means the source is completely reliable. Think major news agencies' official reports. B is usually reliable, C, fairly reliable, D, not usually reliable, E means it's unreliable, and F means, well, you just can't judge it. So this tells us about the credibility of where the information actually came from.
And finally, information confidence. This one's on a 1-6 scale. 1 means the information is confirmed by independent sources rock solid. 2 means it's probably true. 3 is possibly true. 4 is doubtfully true. 5 means improbable. And 6, like the F for sources, means it just cannot be judged. So combining these for every news item we discuss, we'll quickly state its specific reliability and confidence flag. That way, you get a complete picture of how robust the intelligence is without us, rehashing the full definitions each time.
Exactly. That holistic view is absolutely essential for navigating today's complex information landscape. So, shall we dive into the core of the report?
Let's do it. Diving right into the bottom line up front, BLUF, for July 23, 2025. Nextsite's intelligence snapshot reveals a geopolitical environment that remains, well, profoundly volatile, though big surprise there perhaps. We're seeing a real sharpening of trade tensions, ongoing conflicts, and a significant impact from climate-driven crises across the globe. Despite all this, U.S. markets actually hit record highs, even with these looming tariff deadlines hanging over everything. And meanwhile, the U.S. administration just announced this really aggressive AI export plan. It's aimed squarely at bolstering its technological dominance.
Yeah, and across the Atlantic, you've got Brussels in what seems like a desperate race to finalize a 15% tariff agreement with Washington. They're really hoping to avert a much more punishing 30% levy. Asia, meanwhile, is grappling with internal political instability, these simmering border disputes, and just a profound sense of war weariness in some areas. In the Middle East, the immense humanitarian outrage continues. It's mainly due to Israel's relentless bombardment of Gaza and these faltering ceasefire talks. But we're also seeing signs of shifting regional alliances, which is interesting.
Indeed. Like Syria cementing nearly $6 billion in Saudi investment deals. That's huge. And Turkey is moving closer to acquiring Eurofighter jets amidst all this regional instability. Over in Africa, we're seeing legislative wrangling in South Africa. A direct threat of U.S. sanctions will get it out of these humanitarian setbacks caused by cuts in Western aid. Latin America presents kind of a mixed bag. Chile revised its copper price forecast upward. Brazil made a significant diplomatic move by intervening in South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ. And a Mexican tequila maker, Buckle, reported a massive windfall profit. So some bright spots, maybe.
Maybe some tequila-fueled bright spots. And finally, in Oceania and the Pacific, the news really centers around Australia's significant AUKUS payments, that submarine deal. Plus, new CPI reporting and New Zealand stepping up its regulation of space infrastructure. Across all these regions, financial markets are really in flux. They're deeply influenced by commodity prices, intense speculation around trade talks, and these dramatic currency swings. Overall, Nextsite assesses the global threat level as moderate plus some, but with notable pockets of substantial risk concentrated in ongoing conflict zones and specific economic flashpoints.
Okay, so if we connect this to the bigger picture, Nextsite has really homed in on three critical spotlight themes. These are the threads tying much of this diverse intelligence together. They represent the macro currents shaping our world right now.
Right. The first, and perhaps most impactful, is the intensification of the AI arms race. Washington has unveiled this brand new blueprint. It's aimed at supercharging AI exports, cutting environmental red tape, a big one, and quite directly countering China's technological rise. The implications here are really far-reaching. We're looking at an acceleration of regulatory divergence between major powers, a significant export boom for U.S. firms, and an almost certain heightening of tensions with China. The threat level for this is pegged at moderate, but the risk level is considered high.
So this isn't just about boosting a tech industry, is it? It's clearly a strategic geopolitical play. What does this blueprint really mean for global tech dynamics? And maybe for us, for you listening. It suggests that the digital landscape could soon be, bifurcated, with distinct competing tech ecosystems. That could potentially impact everything from the software you use to the devices you buy.
Precisely. And that leads us directly into our second spotlight theme, trade wars escalating. The U.S. is making definite moves towards imposing 15% tariffs on EU goods. And they're maintaining or even increasing levies on key economies like Brazil, Chile, and South Africa. The implications of this are immediate and widespread. We're already seeing tremors rattling through global markets, and there's an increased likelihood, analysts say, of a global recession. The threat level for escalating trade wars is moderate plus whale, with a high risk level attached.
Yeah, when you think about the cascading effects on global economies, it's a classic domino effect, isn't it? These tariffs don't just impact the countries directly involved. They ripple right through supply chains, affect consumer prices, what you pay at the store, and can really dampen overall global growth. It's kind of a dangerous game of economic chicken, and the consumer is often caught right in the crossfire.
Indeed. And our third critical theme, which tragically ties into many of these regional reports, is humanitarian and climate-driven crises. The brief highlights several really harrowing examples: the devastating starvation unfolding in Gaza, the incredible heroism of that teacher in Bangladesh during the plane crash, and the unprecedented wildfires that are raging in Turkey right now. The implications of these events are pretty clear. They significantly boost social unrest, putting immense pressure on governments to act, and increasingly on investors to consider the broader environmental and social impacts of their portfolios. The threat level for these intertwined crises is substantial, and the risk level is high.
What really stands out to me here is the undeniable intertwined nature of conflict and climate change. It feels like we see this more and more. One exacerbates the other, creating this vicious cycle of human suffering and instability. It's a stark reminder that these aren't isolated incidents, but symptoms of larger, interconnected systemic challenges that demand, a holistic approach. All right, let's now dive into the regional deep dives. We'll begin with North America. The regional BLUF tells us that U.S. markets are soaring. It seems driven by optimism over potential trade deals and that aggressive expansion of AI we just mentioned. However, this rosy picture is tempered by impending tariffs and significant deregulation efforts, which are raising both economic and environmental risks. The overall threat level for North America is assessed as moderate plus A with a moderate risk level.
Okay, first up, we see that Wall Street hit record highs as trade optimism drives stocks. Both the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ closed at record levels on July 23rd. This surge was primarily due to signals coming out of Washington about progress in trade talks, specifically with Europe and Japan. This particularly boosted chip makers like NVIDIA and industrial firms like GE Vernova. Investors are also keenly awaiting U.S. housing data, and there's this strong expectation among traders for a 15% tariff compromise with the EU. Now, the reliability confidence on this is A2. That means the source, Reuters, is completely reliable, and the information itself is probably true. Pretty typical for highly verifiable market data like this.
So what does this optimism truly mean for the average person? I mean, record highs are great, but It signals a belief, maybe, that economic headwinds, particularly from trade, might lessen. That can stabilize jobs and investment. But you have to ask how that expected 15% tariff might still impact consumers, right? Well, it's better than 30%. It still means higher prices for imported goods. That could potentially erode purchasing power or shift demand to domestic and possibly more expensive alternatives. And we can actually corroborate this global market reaction. Australian shares are also set to open higher, anticipating similar trade optimism. It really indicates how interconnected these markets truly are.
Right, it's not happening in a vacuum. Moving to energy, oil prices are holding steady. Brent crude is around $68.51 per barrel, and WTI is at $65.25. This stability is largely underpinned by that U.S.-Japan trade agreement and the ongoing expectations of the 15% EU tariff deal. A 3.2 million barrel draw in U.S. crude inventories also played a role, as did some speculation about Russian exports. Analysts, though, are warning that if those EU concessions don't materialize, we could see a supply glut, which would push prices down. This information also carries a reliability confidence of A2. Again, Reuters is completely reliable, and the market data is probably true and widely verifiable.
Yeah, the immediate so what for your gas tank is pretty clear. Stable oil prices underpinned by these trade agreements mean more predictable and hopefully not skyrocketing energy costs for you, the consumer. But it's a fragile stability, isn't it? It's constantly exposed to geopolitical shifts and the success or failure of these really complex negotiations.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting, as you flagged earlier. Trump unveiled an AI export plan to supercharge U.S. dominance. This is a massive 90-point blueprint. It aims to expand AI exports to allies, standardize federal regulations across the board, significantly ease environmental permits, that's key, and accelerate the construction of data centers. The administration explicitly intends to accelerate U.S. AI superiority over China, potentially resuming shipments of advanced chips and software that had been restricted. However, environmentalists are already sounding the alarm, warning that relaxed rules could harm ecosystems and exacerbate climate risks. The plan also rescinds some Biden-era restrictions and emphasizes free speech in AI models, which is interesting. This announcement comes with a reliability confidence of A2. Sources like Reuters and Al Jazeera confirm it as a completely reliable, verifiable, official government announcement. The plan exists, whether it works is another question.
Right. So what are the long-term implications of an AI arms race? On one hand, yeah, it could accelerate innovation, maybe lead to breakthroughs, but it also risks fragmenting the global tech landscape and creating new cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And how does free speech in AI models truly play out? That's such a complex, ethical, and practical issue. It implies less censorship, which could lead to diverse outputs, but also potentially more problematic or harmful content. And this raises that really important question. What's the balance between innovation and environmental protection here? Given the massive energy footprint of data centers and chip manufacturing, easing permits feels like a direct conflict.
It's a major tension point. Next, we have legislative proposals to sanction South Africa over foreign policy. The U.S. House Foreign Affairs Committee actually advanced a bill that would enable tariffs and sanctions against South Africa. This is a direct response to Pretoria's perceived ties to Russia, China, and its stance on the Israel-Hamas conflict. This bill, if it were passed, could impose steep 30% tariffs on South African goods and restrict security cooperation. Now, it still needs full congressional passage, but it has drawn criticism for potentially punishing a key African partner. South Africa's unity government has pledged to review its foreign policy, likely to try and avoid these sanctions. This is reported with a reliability confidence of A2. Reuters, again, completely reliable, and the legislative action itself is probably true and publicly recorded.
Wow. How might this bill redefine U.S.-Africa relations? It feels like a direct challenge to South Africa's historically non-aligned foreign policy, potentially forcing them, and maybe others, to choose sides. And what does this all mean for global supply chains, especially for critical minerals? South Africa is a huge producer of platinum, palladium. Sanctions could disrupt those supplies, raising prices globally and affecting industries from automotive to electronics. Big ripple effects.
Absolutely. Finally, for North America, we see that Equinor writes down U.S. $955 million on U.S. offshore wind projects. Equinor, the Norwegian energy giant, booked a substantial $955 million impairment on its U.S. offshore wind projects. Their CFO explicitly blamed regulatory uncertainty and high tariffs, citing the suspension of several leases and the removal of tax credits. This really highlights how vulnerable renewable energy investments can be to sudden policy shifts and tariff volatility. This financial decision is also highly reliable at A2. Reuters reporting based on verifiable corporate financial disclosures.
Yeah, that's a big hit. And it raises an important question about the long-term stability of green energy investments in this kind of volatile policy environment. If major players face such substantial losses due to policy shifts, it definitely creates a chill for future investment, doesn't it? What does this mean for the U.S.'s clean energy goals? It suggests that without stable, predictable policy frameworks, achieving those ambitious renewable targets is going to be significantly harder and probably more costly. Okay, let's shift our gaze across the pond to Europe. The regional BLUF indicates that Brussels is in a, frantic race to finalize that 15% tariff agreement with Washington. They're desperately hoping to avert a looming, much harsher 30% levy. Meanwhile, European economic policy seems kind of on hold and diplomatic frictions are surfacing. The threat level for Europe is assessed as moderate, but the risk level is high.
First up for Europe, Brussels and Washington are converging on a 15% tariff deal. EU and US diplomats have signaled progress toward a 15% baseline tariff on EU goods. This would match the rate Japan received, and it's all about avoiding that looming 30% levy due on August 1st. Exemptions for key sectors like aircraft, pharmaceuticals, and lumber are reportedly being discussed. Crucially, the EU has prepared a massive 93 billion AGIS package in counter tariffs, ready to deploy if these negotiations fall apart. This news carries a reliability confidence of A2. Completely reliable source, Reuters, and probably true information based on verifiable diplomatic statements.
So what's the real impact of a 15% tariff versus a 30% tariff for you, the consumer? The difference is pretty substantial, isn't it? A 15% tariff will still lead to higher prices for imported European goods, think cars, cheese, wine, but a 30% tariff would effectively price many items out of the market entirely, causing far greater disruption to supply chains and your choices. And how do these huge sums of money, like that $93 billion in counter tariffs, actually become leverage in negotiations?
Well, they signal a credible threat of retaliation. It makes the other side, in this case the U.S., seriously consider the cost of escalating the trade dispute. It means U.S. exporters would face similar pain. Next, we have news that Germany and France are seeking unity ahead of looming U.S. tariffs. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz hosted French President Emmanuel Macron in Berlin. Their primary goal was to craft a joint response to these U.S. tariffs and also to discuss the crucial Franco-German-Spanish Future Combat Air System project, the FCAS. Interestingly, though, differences emerged over a joint letter urging Israel to halt the Gaza war. Germany apparently refused to sign, reflecting diverging Middle East stances between the two core EU powers. This report has an A2 reliability confidence from Reuters, confirming the reliable details of this high-level diplomatic meeting and its stated aims.
Yeah, this really highlights that ongoing dance between EU unity and individual national interest. They want a common front on trade and defense, but their approaches to highly sensitive geopolitical issues like the Middle East can still diverge quite sharply. What does this all mean for European defense autonomy? The FCAS project, budgeted at a staggering $100 billion, is a massive step towards reducing reliance on external powers, particularly the U.S. But internal disagreements, even small ones, can slow progress and create vulnerabilities.
Definitely. Then we see that the European Central Bank, ECB, pauses rate cuts amid trade uncertainty. The ECB held its benchmark interest rate steady at 2% after a series of successive cuts. They directly cited uncertainty over U.S. tariff policy and its potential impact on Eurozone growth and inflation as the reason. Officials still seem to expect a 15% EU-US tariff deal and anticipate one more rate cut later if those tariffs do indeed dampen growth as expected. Meanwhile, the euro has appreciated, hitting its highest level against the dollar since September 2021, as investors seek shelter from the unpredictability of U.S. policy. This decision is reported with an A2 reliability confidence by Reuters. Central bank decisions are official and public.
Okay, so what does this all mean for the Eurozone economy? It suggests caution, right? The ECB is essentially waiting to see the full impact of these trade tensions before making further moves. That could prolong economic stagnation for some member states. And how does that currency appreciation affect European exports?
Well, a stronger euro makes European goods more expensive for international buyers like those in the U.S. or Asia. That could potentially hurt export-dependent industries, think German manufacturing, and slow overall economic growth for the bloc. Next up, oil markets are being roiled by European trade talks and Iran tensions. We touched on this briefly before. Oil prices remain quite volatile, directly influenced by both the EU-US trade negotiations and those ongoing Middle East tensions. Analysts have pointed out that European counter-tariffs, if they're enacted, and any escalation of Iranian threats could seriously exacerbate supply disruptions. Brent crude is hovering around $68.51 per barrel, WTI around $65.25. EU diplomats have even hinted at retaliatory measures if the tariff deal fails, which adds another layer of uncertainty. This news is confirmed by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence. High confidence in these market observations.
Yeah, it just highlights the deep interconnectedness of geopolitics and everyday energy costs. Every time there's tension in the Middle East or a major trade dispute, it directly impacts the price you pay at the pump, sometimes almost immediately. What does this all mean for global inflation? Higher energy costs ripple through economies, increasing production and transport costs for almost everything, which ultimately gets passed on to consumers like you.
Exactly. Finally, for Europe, a macro snapshot shows the EU countering U.S. tariffs and investing in defense. As we mentioned, European leaders have prepared that substantial $93 billion counter-tariff package, ready to go against U.S. goods should the trade talks ultimately fail. Simultaneously, that Franco-German-Spanish FCAS fighter jet project is pressing ahead, despite some internal cost disputes. This really underscores Europe's strong drive for what they call strategic autonomy. But the broader macro picture for Europe remains pretty clouded by this trade uncertainty, the currency appreciation making exports harder, and the very high price tag of defense integration. This is reported with A2 reliability confidence by Reuters, based on verifiable official proposals and project updates.
Yeah, and it raises that important question again. Can Europe truly achieve strategic autonomy in defense without a fully unified foreign policy? It seems like a tremendous challenge to pool resources effectively and make joint decisions when member states still have such distinct geopolitical priorities and, frankly, historical allegiances. It's a real tightrope walk between national interests and continental aspirations. Okay, let's move over to Asia. The regional BLUF paints a picture of a region experiencing a real mix of humanitarian crises, border clashes, and complex political maneuvers. We see anti-corruption protests in Ukraine, geographically on the edge, but cultural linked here sometimes in reports, a heroic teacher's sacrifice in Bangladesh, and simmering tensions on the Thai-Cambodian border. All of this highlights the region's inherent fragility. The overall threat level for Asia is assessed as moderate, plus with a high risk level.
Our first story from Asia is truly heartbreaking. A teacher died saving students in Bangladesh after a fighter jet crash. Maharan Chowdhury, just 25 years old, tragically lost her life after repeatedly entering burning classrooms to rescue her students when a Bangladesh Air Force jet crashed into their school in Chattogram. 29 people perished in total. Her incredible actions sparked nationwide mourning and immediately revived public debate over safety protocols for military flights operating near densely populated areas. This profoundly human and tragic story is reported by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence. Completely reliable, probably true account of a verifiable event.
Just awful. What does this tell us about public safety infrastructure and military operations in densely populated areas? It raises really serious questions about risk management and urban planning when military assets operate so close to civilian life. It's such a stark reminder of the human cost when safety nets fail.
Absolutely tragic. Next, we have a significant diplomatic incident. Thailand expelled the Cambodian ambassador after a landmine incident. Thailand recalled its own ambassador and ordered the Cambodian envoy to leave Bangkok after a Thai soldier was seriously injured by a landmine in a disputed border area. Bangkok accused Phnom Penh of recently laying new mines in the area, but Cambodia flatly denied this, claiming the explosion was due to leftover mines from past wars, a common issue in that region. In response, Thailand shut down border checkpoints and banned tourists from the affected zone, escalating things quickly. This news from Reuters has an A2 reliability confidence, indicating completely reliable reporting of these observable diplomatic actions and border closures.
Okay, let's unpack this a bit. A landmine incident escalating almost immediately to diplomatic expulsions. That feels fast. It really highlights these deep-seated historical tensions and the dangerous legacy of past conflicts, particularly in regions still littered with unexploded ordnance from decades ago. What does this all mean for regional stability? It shows how easily dormant conflicts can reignite and disrupt cross-border relations, impacting trade, tourism, and security with surprising speed.
Indeed. Then, a familiar tension point. Taiwan denounces Chinese interference in a recall vote. Taiwan's Mainland Affairs Council has accused China of interfering in an upcoming recall vote against 24 Kuomintang legislators. They warned that the Chinese Communist Party aims to influence democratic processes on the island. Beijing, predictably, dismissed these allegations as slander. The recall itself is constitutional, but obviously stirs tensions in the current climate. This incident is reported by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence, confirming the reliable reporting of these public statements from officials, even if the core accusation is disputed.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting. How does external influence attempt to shape democratic outcomes? It's often a subtle game, isn't it? Using disinformation, maybe economic pressure, social media manipulation, all to sway public opinion and electoral results. What are the broader implications for cross-strait relations? These incidents just erode trust further and fuel animosity, making peaceful resolutions seem even more distant and complicating that delicate balance across the strait.
Definitely a space to watch. Moving across the subcontinent, Pakistan signals readiness for dialogue with India, emphasizes Kashmir. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif told the British High Commissioner Jane Marriott that Islamabad is open to meaningful dialogue with New Delhi on all outstanding issues. He also praised the UK's de-escalation efforts. Pakistan explicitly emphasized the Kashmir dispute and terrorism as key topics for discussion. However, India remains focused on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and cross-border terrorism concerns, which unfortunately limits the potential for significant progress right now. The Indian Express reports this with a B2 reliability confidence. That means it's a usually reliable source, and the information is probably true, given it's an official statement from a diplomatic meeting, though perhaps lacking some context.
Yeah, it raises that important question. Are these genuine overtures from Pakistan, or is it more strategic posturing? Sometimes public statements are made more for international audiences or domestic consumption than out of a genuine intent to negotiate breakthrough deals. What does this mean for stability in a nuclear-armed region? Any small step towards dialogue, even limited, can theoretically reduce the risk of escalation. But the deeply entrenched issues like Kashmir make true lasting peace incredibly challenging.
Very true. Next, from Eastern Europe, touching on Ukraine again. Ukrainian protests over an anti-corruption law prompted a government U-turn. Thousands protested in Kyiv against a new law that was widely perceived to undermine independent anti-corruption agencies, institutions critical for their EU aspirations. In response, President Volodymyr Zelensky quickly promised to propose an alternative bill. He explicitly acknowledged EU warnings that the original legislation would jeopardize Ukraine's EU accession bid. Activists had said the law basically reestablished political control over anti-graft bodies. Al Jazeera reports this with an A2 reliability confidence, confirming it as a completely reliable and probably true account of public protests and the subsequent government reaction.
What does this tell us about the ongoing battle for good governance, especially for countries seeking closer ties with the EU? It highlights the persistent challenge of internal reforms and that constant tension between political power and accountability. It also shows the power of civil society when it mobilizes.
Absolutely. Finally, for Asia, we see that Russia-Ukraine peace talks are inching forward on humanitarian swaps. Delegations from both countries met again in Istanbul for negotiations, but focused specifically on prisoner exchanges and other humanitarian issues, not a broad ceasefire. Ukrainian delegate Rustem Umerov stated that some progress was made on these swaps, but he noted that the Kremlin explicitly refused to discuss a ceasefire at this meeting. The Moscow negotiator, Medinsky, reiterated that a leaders' meeting would only be for signing a deal, not negotiating one. These talks occurred just as President Trump gave Russia that 50-day deadline to end the war or face heightened sanctions. This news from Al Jazeera has an A2 reliability confidence, indicating completely reliable and probably true reporting of the diplomatic meeting and its stated outcomes.
So what does this all mean for the broader conflict? It suggests that despite the ongoing fighting and harsh rhetoric, there are still these limited channels for engagement, particularly on humanitarian grounds. But can humanitarian progress actually build trust for a ceasefire? Or is it merely a limited concession? Often in these entrenched conflicts, it feels like the latter, doesn't it? A way to maybe alleviate some international pressure without addressing the core political demands. Okay, let's move our focus now to the Middle East. The regional BLUF here is quite stark, as you mentioned earlier. Israel's relentless strikes on Gaza have precipitated a humanitarian catastrophe and triggered widespread global outrage. Concurrently, we're seeing Syria deepening its economic ties with Saudi Arabia and Turkey pursuing those Eurofighter deals. The threat level for the Middle East is assessed as substantial with a high risk level.
Our first report from the Middle East is a deeply disturbing one. An Israeli airstrike killed a sleeping family in Gaza City. An Israeli airstrike on a residential block tragically killed journalist Wala al-Jabari, her husband, and their 5 children while they were sleeping. This horrific incident was part of a larger toll, with over 100 Palestinian deaths reported in just 24 hours of bombings. Israel claimed it was targeting terrorist infrastructure, but survivors on the ground vehemently disputed this, saying it was purely a residential building. This heartbreaking incident is reported by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence, high level of confidence in the occurrence and its immediate devastating human cost.
Just devastating. This is a deeply disturbing report, and the immense human suffering raises that critical question again. How does the international community respond effectively to such a severe humanitarian situation? The pressure for intervention, ceasefire, and aid just escalates dramatically with each such incident, highlighting the dire crisis unfolding.
It's truly horrific. And following that, global NGOs are condemning Gaza starvation as ceasefire talks falter. More than 100 aid organizations, including major ones like Doctors Without Borders and Save the Children, have demanded decisive action from world leaders to end the blockade of Gaza as starvation deaths continue to rise alarmingly. On the same day, Hamas submitted its response to a ceasefire proposal to Qatari and Egyptian mediators, but the contents remain confidential. Meanwhile, Israeli President Isaac Herzog defended military operations, arguing that Hamas exploits civilians and uses them as shields. Reported by DW and Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence, these condemnations from major NGOs and the status of diplomatic actions are publicly verifiable.
What's really striking here is that stark disconnect between the dire humanitarian situation on the ground, people actually starving, and the stalled political process. While people suffer, the negotiations remain gridlocked. What does this all mean for the future of aid delivery and international law? It highlights the immense challenges of upholding basic humanitarian principles in active conflict zones, and frankly, the limitations of international bodies to enforce them without a political solution agreed upon by the warring parties.
It's a grim picture. Next, a significant economic and geopolitical shift. Syria signed nearly US $6 billion in deals with Saudi Arabia. Syria and Saudi Arabia signed 44 agreements worth almost $6 billion USD at a major investment conference held in Damascus. These cover projects in energy, real estate, and agriculture. These deals clearly underscore the warming ties since the two countries restored diplomatic relations last year. Analysts view this huge investment as a crucial lifeline for Syria's war-torn economy. And for Riyadh, it's seen as an attempt to counter Iranian influence in Syria and the broader region. This important development is reported by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence based on verifiable official investment announcements made at the conference.
This really is a significant development. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it suggests a major shift in regional dynamics. Saudi Arabia is actively projecting its power and influence even into a country deeply scarred by war and still politically volatile. How might this impact Syria's future and Saudi Arabia's standing? It could provide crucial economic relief for Syria, potentially stabilizing the Assad regime further. For Saudi Arabia, it's a strategic move to reassert its leadership role in the Arab world and counter rival influences like Iran and Turkey.
Definitely a strategic play. Then we have Turkey nearing a Eurofighter deal while pursuing F-16 purchase. Turkey has reached preliminary agreements with both Britain and Germany to acquire Eurofighter Typhoon jets. And simultaneously, they are still negotiating a purchase of F-16s from the United States. Turkish Defense Minister Yaşar Güler stated that the Eurofighter buy would significantly enhance Turkey's air combat capabilities amidst all this regional instability. These dual deals come in the context of Israel's escalating strikes in the region and ongoing concerns about Iran's nuclear program. Reuters reports this with an A2 reliability confidence. Statements from defense ministers at major industry fairs like IDEF are considered official and verifiable.
What's fascinating here is Turkey's balancing act between different military suppliers. They're clearly not putting all their eggs in one basket, are they? They seem to be leveraging competition between the U.S. and European defense industries. This raises an important question. What are the geopolitical implications of diversifying defense ties like this? It allows a country like Turkey greater strategic flexibility and leverage, potentially playing suppliers off against each other. But it can also complicate interoperability with allies like NATO and create new political considerations.
It's a complex game. Next, Iran is set to host an IAEA technical team amid nuclear tensions. Iran has agreed to allow a technical mission from the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, to visit Tehran in the coming weeks. However, and this is a big caveat, this visit is specifically framed to discuss relations without actually inspecting any nuclear sites. Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister Kazim Garibabadi stated that the visit aims to improve cooperation. This announcement comes amid reports of high levels of enriched uranium in Iran and the deadlocked talks on reviving the 2015 nuclear deal, the JCPOA. Reuters provides this with an A2 reliability confidence based on verifiable official invitations and diplomatic statements between Iran and the IAEA.
So what does this all mean for the fragile state of nuclear non-proliferation? It feels like a very delicate dance. While any engagement is arguably better than none, a technical visit without any inspection capability seems like a very limited step. Is this a genuine move towards de-escalation, or is it simply strategic delay tactics? a way to buy time and reduce immediate pressure without giving anything substantial away. The details of what actually happens during the visit will be crucial for understanding the true intent.
Absolutely, the substance matters. Finally, for the Middle East, a tragic reminder of climate's impact. A Turkey wildfire killed 10 firefighters. A devastating wildfire in Turkey's central Eskişehir province killed 10 firefighters and injured 14 others when sudden, unpredictable shifts in wind trapped their crews. Prosecutors have now launched an investigation into the incident. This tragedy starkly underscores Turkey's increasing vulnerability to these climate-driven disasters and the immense strain it puts on their emergency response capabilities. Reuters reports this with an A2 reliability confidence, a completely reliable and probably true account of the event and the tragic casualties.
Just awful. And it's such a stark reminder of the very real, immediate consequences of climate change. It's not just about long-term predictions anymore. It's about lives lost and resources stretched incredibly thin right now. What does this all mean for a country like Turkey, which faces increasing climate pressures like drought and heat waves? It means prioritizing climate adaptation, investing heavily in robust emergency services, and collaborating internationally on climate resilience will become even more critical for their national security and basic human safety. Okay, let's shift our focus now down to Africa. The regional BLUF states that the continent is wrestling with a complex mix of legislative battles, persisting human rights struggles, and the impact of declining Western aid. South Africa's new unity government passed a major budget bill, but simultaneously faces that threat of a U.S. sanctions bill we discussed earlier. Mozambique is confronting serious post-election unrest, and cuts to UK aid are imperiling critical services across the continent. The threat level for Africa is assessed as moderate, with a moderate risk level overall.
First up, we have South Africa's parliament passing a budget bill amid coalition tensions. South Africa's parliament managed to approve the 2025 appropriation bill. This was a crucial first step for the new unity government, made possible only after the African National Congress, ANC, and the main opposition, the Democratic Alliance, DA, reached a compromise. This bill allocates funds for vital infrastructure and health projects, but it has faced considerable backlash, particularly over a VAT increase and ongoing allegations of corruption. The unity government has pledged improved oversight and response. This significant legislative event is reported by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence. Completely reliable and probably true information, as parliamentary votes and budget approvals are official public records.
Yeah, it raises that really important question, though. Can this unity government truly navigate these complex financial challenges effectively? Passing a budget is one thing, but successful implementation and actually addressing that public discontent over the VAT increase will be a critical test for their ability to govern collaboratively and maintain stability.
Definitely a test. And following directly from our North America discussion, we see the U.S. sanctions bill threatening South Africa over foreign policy again. The U.S. House has advanced that legislation authorizing tariffs and potentially severe sanctions against South Africa, citing its alignment with Russia, China, and its stance on Hamas. This bill could lead to those steep 30% tariffs and restrictions on security cooperation if Pretoria doesn't pivot its foreign policies significantly. South Africa has already denounced this measure as neo-colonial, but critically has also stated it has begun reviewing its foreign policy, likely in response. Reuters reports this legislative action with an A2 reliability confidence. Completely reliable, probably true account of the bill's progress.
Right. If we take this to the bigger picture, this is such a direct challenge to South Africa's long-standing, non-aligned foreign policy. It seems designed to force them, and perhaps by extension, other nations, to choose sides in this new era of great power competition. What does this all mean for other African nations trying to navigate this tricky landscape? It sets a pretty stark precedent, doesn't it? That aligning with certain global powers could come with significant economic and diplomatic costs imposed by others.
It certainly sends a message. Next, we turn to Mozambique, seeking to prosecute an opposition leader over protests. Mozambican authorities have initiated moves to prosecute the main opposition leader, Venancio Mondlane. He's accused of allegedly inciting unrest following the disputed 2024 elections. Mondlane vehemently denies these accusations, asserting that the ruling Frelimo party manipulated the election results. Tragically, over 300 people died in protests linked to these disputed elections last year. Analysts are now warning that prosecuting Mondlane could unravel the fragile political compromises that have been reached since then. This legal action is reported by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence. Completely reliable and probably true information regarding a verifiable legal move against a prominent figure.
Yeah, this really highlights the fragility of post-election stability, particularly in nations with a history of political tension and disputed votes. What does this all mean for democracy and human rights in the region? Such prosecutions can easily be seen as attempts to stifle dissent, undermine democratic institutions, and could potentially lead to further unrest, creating a dangerous cycle of instability.
It's a worrying development. Next, looking at external factors, we have UK aid cuts threatening African health and education programs. The UK government's decision to reduce its official development assistance, ODA budget, from 0.5% down to 0.3% of its gross national income is predicted to significantly harm children's health and education across Africa. And this is according to the UK government's own impact assessment. These cuts are shifting funds towards multilateral agencies like the World Bank, but leaving critical bilateral projects, country-to-country aid in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mozambique, and Ethiopia severely underfunded. NGOs are warning this could lead to higher child mortality and school dropout rates. The Guardian reports this with an A2 reliability confidence. Official government impact assessments and statements from major NGOs like Save the Children are verifiable.
This raises a really important question about the long-term impacts of shifting aid priorities, especially when cuts are involved. These aren't just abstract numbers. They translate directly into fewer vaccines administered, less access to basic education, and real human suffering. What does this all mean for human development in Africa? It could potentially reverse years of hard-won progress in critical social sectors, possibly increasing poverty and instability in the long run.
It's a significant concern. Continuing on humanitarian issues, we have parents of Chibok girls pleading for action. 11 long years after Boko Haram kidnapped 276 girls from their school in Chibok, Nigeria, a staggering 87 still remain missing or in captivity. The families and activists are renewing their pleas, petitioning the Nigerian government for intensified search efforts, and crucially, for better trauma support for the girls who have been rescued over the years. This prolonged plight underscores the persistent insecurity challenges in northern Nigeria and highlights the limitations of current counterinsurgency strategies. Okay, Africa, referencing multiple sources, reports this ongoing advocacy with a B2 reliability confidence. Usually reliable source, and the information is probably true and widely documented.
Such a heartbreaking story, and it continues to resonate globally. It's become a symbol of unresolved conflict and its devastating impact on the most vulnerable, particularly girls seeking education. What does this tell us about the persistence of insecurity and the need for comprehensive support systems? It underscores that military solutions alone are often insufficient. Long-term stability requires addressing the root causes of conflict, poverty, lack of opportunity, governance issues, and providing holistic long-term support for victims in affected communities.
Absolutely. Finally, for Africa, we have serious allegations of extrajudicial killings by Mali's army and Wagner Group. Human Rights Watch has released an investigative report accusing Mali's army and the Russia-linked Wagner Group mercenaries of executing several Fulani men during joint counterterrorism operations in central Mali. The Malian government has denied these specific allegations. However, analysts warn that continued abuses like these, if true, could dangerously fuel recruitment by extremist groups by alienating local communities and further strain Mali's relations with Western partners who have previously provided security assistance. Africa reports these allegations with a B3 reliability confidence. It's a usually reliable source, OK Africa referencing HRW, but the information itself is only possibly true at this stage, as it's based on an NGO report and subject to denial and ongoing investigation, not independently confirmed by multiple government sources yet.
All right. This raises a really important and difficult question about the human cost of counterterrorism operations, especially when they involve private military contractors like Wagner, who operate with less oversight. What does this all mean for stability in the Sahel region? Such alleged abuses can totally alienate local populations, making them more susceptible to extremist recruitment narratives and fundamentally undermine international efforts to bring lasting stability to a very fragile region. Okay, let's pivot now over to Latin America. The regional BLUF for this region indicates a mix of economic recalibrations and significant legal battles. Chile has revised its copper price forecast upwards and is preparing to expropriate a notorious property linked to Pinochet-era torture. Brazil has escalated diplomatic pressure on Israel at the International Court of Justice, and we're seeing some corporate profits signaling resilience despite those ongoing U.S. tariffs. The threat level for Latin America is assessed as low to moderate, with a moderate risk level overall.
First up, we have Chile raising its copper price forecast amid tariff uncertainty. Chile's finance minister, Mario Marcel, has increased the government's 2025 average copper price forecast slightly, up to $4.28 per pound from $4.26. He did also acknowledge some lagging output at the major Collahuasi mine. However, overall economic growth for Chile is still projected at 2.5%, as non-mining sectors are apparently offsetting declines in copper production. This is happening while the U.S. is set to impose that huge 50% tariff on copper imports starting August 1st, which, interestingly, is boosting global prices but also raising volatility concerns. Reuters reports this with an A2 reliability confidence, completely reliable source, and the official government forecast is probably true and verifiable.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how a U.S. tariff on copper imports can actually boost prices for the exporting country, Chile, at least in the short term. A 50% tariff increases the cost significantly for U.S. buyers, but it also signals a potential scarcity in the market, allowing Chile to perhaps command higher prices from other buyers, like China. What does this all mean for Chile's economy? As a major copper exporter, higher prices are generally good for state revenues and the national budget, but the volatility adds significant uncertainty for long-term planning and investment.
It's a double-edged sword. Next, a really significant diplomatic move. Brazil will join South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the ICJ. Brazil is in the process of finalizing its legal briefs to formally intervene in South Africa's ongoing case against Israel at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Brazil is accusing Israel of committing acts of genocide in Gaza. Spain, Turkey, and Colombia are reportedly planning similar interventions, creating a bloc of nations challenging Israel's actions legally. Brazil argues that Israel is violating international law, but interestingly, it's also downplaying the potential negative impact on its relations with the U.S., despite Washington hitting Brazil with 50% tariffs on some goods recently. Brazil's Jewish community has criticized the move internally. Reuters reports this major decision with an A2 reliability confidence. Official government decisions to intervene in international legal cases are public and verifiable.
Right, here's where it gets really interesting. Brazil, a major Latin American power, taking such a strong public stance on the global stage, especially against a close U.S. ally like Israel, is a significant foreign policy statement. What does this all mean for international law and diplomatic alliances? It highlights how international legal forums like the ICJ are becoming key battlegrounds for geopolitical influence and projecting moral standing. It could potentially shift traditional alliances and create new diplomatic blocs, particularly among global South nations.
It's definitely a statement. Then a powerful step towards historical justice within Chile. Chile will expropriate land linked to Pinochet-era torture. Chile's justice minister has announced plans to expropriate Villa Baviera, which was formerly known as Colonia Dignidad. This infamous compound, once run by the escaped Nazi war criminal Paul Schaefer, was notoriously used by Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship to torture political dissidents. The 117-hectare property is now set to be transformed into a national memorial site. The current landowners will be compensated. This move has strong support from victims' families and human rights groups, though some current residents reportedly fear losing their homes. Reuters reports this significant legal and historical initiative with an A2 reliability confidence. Official government announcements regarding legislative plans like this are verifiable.
This feels like a really powerful step towards historical justice and national reconciliation for Chile. What does this all mean for a nation still grappling with the legacy of its past? It shows a strong commitment to confronting uncomfortable truths, providing symbolic and tangible redress for victims, and perhaps reshaping national identity around human rights and remembrance. It's about acknowledging the past to build a different future.
Indeed. Now for some surprising financial news from Mexico. Tequila maker Beckel quadrupled profit on FX gains. Mexican tequila producer Beckel, best known for its Jose Cuervo brand, reported a massive second-quarter profit of 2.2 billion pesos. That's about $106.6 million USD. That's 4 times the profit from the same period last year. And this was largely due to foreign exchange gains from a weaker Mexican peso, which boosted the value of their international sales. Actual revenues rose only 2.8%. The firm makes nearly 60% of its sales in the U.S. and Canada, and may even escape future U.S. tariffs thanks to the USMCA trade agreement protections. Reuters reports this with an A2 reliability confidence. Corporate earnings reports like this are audited and publicly disclosed, so the numbers are solid.
Wow. So it seems tequila sales, heavily boosted by favorable currency shifts, are truly saving the day for Beckel. Expert, it's just fascinating how a company's bottom line can sometimes be more influenced by currency exchange rates than by actual consumer demand or sales volume. Are there any lessons here for other businesses with significant international sales?
Absolutely. It highlights the critical importance of currency hedging strategies and careful monitoring of exchange rates. These factors can be just as impactful, or even more so sometimes, than sales volume or production costs for internationally exposed companies. Lastly, for Latin America, a legal battle impacting major infrastructure. A Brazilian judge rejected Maersk's bid to alter port auction rules. A Brazilian federal judge denied the shipping giant Maersk's request to suspend the auction process for the crucial Tecon 10 container terminal at the Port of Santos, one of Latin America's busiest ports. Maersk had argued that incumbent operators like themselves should be allowed to bid in the first round, effectively giving them an advantage. But the judge ruled the current auction process, which aimed to encourage new entrants, was legal. This contract requires a substantial investment of 5.6 billion reals, about $1.1 billion USD. Maersk may appeal, but the decision clears the way for potentially new operators. U.S. News, citing Reuters, reports this legal decision with an A2 reliability confidence. Court rulings are official and public record.
Yeah, this raises an important question. What's the role of courts in shaping economic competition and major infrastructure development? Judicial decisions like this can significantly impact market structures. In this case, it seems aimed at encouraging new investment and potentially breaking up the dominance of incumbent operators, which could ultimately affect trade efficiency and logistics costs for businesses and consumers. Okay, let's turn our attention finally to Oceania and the Pacific. The regional BLUF indicates that Australia and New Zealand are enacting policies to align with U.S. trade demands, reinforce their defense commitments, and also regulate emerging areas like space infrastructure. Within Australian corporations, we're also seeing tech layoffs and some leadership controversies, highlighting ongoing labor market adjustments down under. The threat level for Oceania Pacific is assessed as low, with a low to moderate risk level overall.
First up for Oceania, we have Australia lifting biosecurity restrictions on U.S. beef imports. Australia has removed long-standing restrictions on U.S. beef imports, which were related to concerns about mad cow disease, or BSE, from years ago. This strategic move appears driven by the hope of persuading Washington to reduce those significant 50% tariffs on Australian steel and aluminum exports, and also to cancel a proposed, really punitive 200% tariff on some Australian pharmaceutical products. It allows U.S. beef imports under strict conditions now, signaling Canberra's clear willingness to make concessions for trade relief. This decision is reported by Reuters with an A2 reliability confidence. Government policy changes like this are official and verifiable.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is the very strategic use of food imports beef, in this case as a bargaining chip, in much broader trade negotiations covering steel, aluminum, and pharmaceuticals. It's a clear example of how diverse economic sectors can be linked in these high-stakes diplomatic efforts. So what does this all mean for consumers in the agricultural sector in Australia? For consumers, it could mean more choice and potentially lower prices for beef eventually. For Australian beef farmers, though, it introduces new competition from a major producer, which they will certainly need to adapt to.
Absolutely. Next, a significant defense commitment continues. Australia pays $800 million a U.S. installment, despite U.S. review. The Australian government has paid the second major installment, $800 million, which is about $525 million USD, for the AUS nuclear submarine program. This payment was made even while President Trump's administration is conducting an ongoing review of the entire pact. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese confirmed that these payments are following the original agreed timetable and also affirmed the continued training of Australian naval personnel in U.S. shipyards for the program. This massive 30-year program is valued at around $368 billion in total. U.S. News, again citing Reuters, reports this major defense commitment with an A2 reliability confidence. Government defense payments and official statements like these are verifiable.
Yeah, this really highlights Australia's deep, long-term strategic commitment to the U.S. Despite any shifting political winds or reviews happening in the U.S., they are clearly signaling that this defense pact is a fundamental national priority that transcends changes in U.S. administrations. What does this all mean for defense capabilities in the wider Indo-Pacific region? It signifies a major planned upgrade in Australia's maritime power projection capabilities, reinforcing deterrence efforts, and contributing significantly to regional security stability in the decades ahead.
It's a huge commitment. Then we have news that Australia will publish a complete monthly CPI series with rate cuts on hold. The Australian Bureau of Statistics, ABS, has announced it will begin releasing a full monthly Consumer Price Index, CPI, starting from November 26, 2025. Previously, they only released full data quarterly. This move aims to improve economic policy transparency and align Australia with measurement practices in other advanced economies. In response, the Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, has postponed any further interest rate cuts until at least July 30th, specifically to fully assess the upcoming inflation data under the new system. Quarterly CPI reporting will continue until the back data is filled in. Reuters reports this significant policy shift with an A2 reliability confidence. Official statistical agency announcements and central bank decisions are factual and public.
Okay, this raises an interesting question. How does more frequent economic data, like monthly inflation figures, actually affect monetary policy decisions and market reactions? More timely data theoretically allows central banks like the RBA to be more agile, perhaps more responsive to economic shifts. But it could also lead to more frequent policy adjustments and potentially increased market volatility as investors react instantly to every new data point. What does this mean for economic forecasting? It should provide a much clearer, more real-time picture of inflation trends, which is invaluable for businesses, investors, and policymakers alike.
Definitely more grist for the mill. Next, a trend we're seeing globally, hitting Australia. Australian software firm WiseTech to cut jobs as AI automation grows. Logistics software provider WiseTech Global, a major player, announced it will reduce its headcount to improve efficiency and plans to invest further in artificial intelligence automation across its operations. The company didn't specify the exact number of layoffs, but the Australian Financial Review reported on internal communications indicating an increasing reliance on AI to handle tasks previously done by humans. WiseTech has around 3,500 employees globally. Reuters reports the significant business decision with an A2 reliability confidence. Corporate announcements of job cuts and strategic shifts towards automation are verifiable.
Okay, let's unpack this. This feels like a prime example of that AI boom versus the labor market global correlation we discussed in the Spotlight themes. AI is clearly boosting efficiency and potentially profits for companies like WiseTech, but it's coming at the direct cost of human jobs. What does this all mean for the future of jobs in the tech sector and beyond? It signals a clear and urgent need for widespread reskilling and upskilling initiatives. As routine tasks become increasingly automated, new roles will emerge that require human oversight, creativity, critical thinking, and emotional intelligence skills AI can't easily replicate yet.
A major societal shift underway. Then a corporate governance story from down under. National Australia Bank CEO addresses media scrutiny. The CEO of National Australia Bank, NAB, Andrew Irvine, told a banking conference that he must essentially weather media coverage regarding investor complaints about his leadership style and also allegations of excessive drinking at corporate events. The NAB board has reportedly increased mentoring and leadership development support for Irvine following these complaints, but they continue to publicly express support for him staying in the role. He focused his speech on helping customers navigate current financial pressures. Reuters reports this corporate governance news with an A2 reliability confidence, based on verifiable public statements from the CEO and confirmed actions taken by the bank's board.
Yeah, this raises an important, often tricky question. How do large companies balance transparency, especially towards investors and the public, with protecting the individual reputations of their senior executives, particularly when facing public scrutiny? It's a really delicate act, isn't it? Especially for public figures in positions of significant trust, where the line between private behavior and public image and its impact on the company is constantly being debated and redrawn.
It is indeed. Finally, for Oceania, we have New Zealand regulating satellite tracking stations and high-altitude infrastructure. New Zealand's parliament has passed the Outer Space High-Altitude Activities Amendment Bill. This new legislation will regulate ground-based space infrastructure, specifically things like satellite tracking stations, and it comes into effect on July 29th. Under the new law, operators of such facilities must obtain licenses and, critically, vet any foreign partners involved. Space Minister Judith Collins stated that the law aims explicitly to protect New Zealand's national security amidst reports of foreign entities attempting to set up facilities potentially for military intelligence gathering purposes on NZ soil. Reuters reports this new regulatory framework with an A2 reliability confidence. Parliamentary legislation is official and verifiable public record.
What's fascinating here is how the final frontier of space is increasingly tied directly to national security concerns on the ground. It's not just about satellites flying overhead anymore. Countries are realizing that control over space-related infrastructure on their territory, the ground stations that communicate with those satellites, is absolutely crucial for strategic autonomy and intelligence gathering in the 21st century. This highlights the growing importance of space assets, not just for communication or GPS, but for national defense and intelligence operations. So we've covered the official intelligence, the reports, the flags. But what's really buzzing on the ground, here's where it gets really interesting. Next site also gathers what they call people's hearsay. This gives us a glimpse into how these events are actually being perceived and discussed by ordinary people across social media, forums, and other platforms.
Yeah, this section is absolutely crucial for understanding the human element, right? And how information or sometimes misinformation spreads like wildfire online. It encourages critical thinking about diverse viewpoints and the narratives that start taking shape often very quickly. Okay, so for North America, on Twitter, the hashtag trade deal is trending. Users seem cautiously optimistic about Wall Street's record highs, but there's a very clear undercurrent of worry about how even that potential 15% EU tariff might still hurt consumers' wallets. Over on Reddit's Our Wall Street Bets, always an interesting place, threads are buzzing about AI stock bets, particularly NVIDIA, following Trump's big AI export plan announcement. But even there, posters are cautioning that all this deregulation could fuel another unsustainable tech bubble. And interestingly, looking across the Pacific on China's Weibo platform, Chinese netizens are widely criticizing the U.S. AI deregulation push as another Cold War move. And there's a lot of commentary lamenting that China feels it must respond with its own accelerated national AI strategy.
Yeah, it's clear that despite Wall Street cheering, ordinary people are definitely nervous about potential price increases from tariffs. That hits home directly. And the AI discussion, particularly the reaction seen on Weibo, shows just how deeply entangled this technological competition has become with nationalistic sentiment and geopolitical rivalry. It's fascinating and a bit scary to see how high-level policy translates almost instantly into public anxiety and nationalistic fervor online.
Absolutely. Moving to Europe, on Twitter, the hashtag tariff war is showing a lot of Europeans venting frustration at Washington's tariff threats. Many are calling for strong EU unity in response, but others are expressing fear that retaliatory measures will just boomerang back and hurt European consumers too, maybe exacerbating existing economic woes. On YouTube, looking at comments under videos covering that Merz-Macron meeting in Berlin, viewers are actively debating whether Germany was right or wrong not to sign the joint letter calling for an end to the Gaza war. It really mirrors the broader divisions within EU public opinion on sensitive foreign policy issues. And over on the Reddit EU Politics subreddit, users are discussing the ECB's decision to pause rate cuts. Some are praising the central bank's prudence given all the uncertainty, but many others are complaining that continued high borrowing costs are really hurting small businesses across the Eurozone.
What stands out to you about how these discussions reveal the pressure points within the EU, both economically and diplomatically? For me, it's that palpable tension between the desire for collective EU action and the persistence of individual national interests or perspectives. And also, just the immediate awareness of how high-level policy, like ECB interest rates, directly impacts everyday economic life, especially for small business owners.
Exactly. For Asia, on Twitter, Bangladeshi users are hailing the teacher Mahirin Chaudhry as a national hero, using hashtags like #Mahirin the Brave. But alongside the grief, some are demanding accountability from the Air Force and calling for stricter safety protocols after that tragic jet crash. On the line messaging app, popular in Thailand, chat groups show considerable anger over the landmine incident on the Cambodian border. There's some nationalist rhetoric calling for stronger border defense, but others are urging dialogue and renewed cooperation on mine clearance efforts. And on Weibo in China, state-aligned accounts are, as expected, denying any interference in Taiwan's recall vote, labeling Taipei's accusations as baseless propaganda. But independent users, where visible, are expressing genuine concern about the rising cross-strait tensions.
What does this all mean about how public narratives are shaped around national tragedies, border disputes, and political interference? It shows how quickly outrage and patriotism can ignite online, often fueled by tragic events or perceived external threats. And it also highlights how official government narratives often clash sharply with individual concerns or independent analysis, especially in politically charged situations like Taiwan. The online space becomes a real battleground for these narratives.
It really does. In the Middle East, on Twitter, users from across the region and the world are decrying the Gaza strikes, sharing horrific images like those of the al-Jabari family, and using hashtags like #StopTheSiege. On the other side, pro-Israel accounts are actively arguing that Hamas uses civilians as human shields, presenting a counter-narrative. On Instagram, Syrian entrepreneurs are celebrating those Saudi investment pledges with hashtags like #RebuildSyria, expressing hope for the future. But critics, often anonymously, are warning online that corruption within the Syrian regime could siphon off a large portion of those funds before they reach the intended projects. And on Reddit's World News, discussions about Turkey's Eurofighter purchase are speculating widely. Is Ankara pivoting away from the US F-16 program? Was there some kind of hidden bargain linking the jets to Turkey's recent NATO vote regarding regarding Sweden. Lots of geopolitical tea leaf reading.
What's fascinating and deeply troubling, here's the stark contrast in perspectives, even within online discussions, on highly sensitive issues like the Gaza conflict. It underscores the deep, often irreconcilable divisions, and how information and images are framed completely differently based on political leanings and national identities. It reveals the true complexity and often the polarization of public opinion.
Absolutely. For Africa, on Twitter, South African users are actively arguing over the new unity government's budget. Hashtags like #CoalitionChaos and #BudgetBill are trending. Many are questioning the fairness of the VAT increase, while others are praising the planned infrastructure spending. On Facebook, Nigerian parents and activists are sharing heartbreaking memories and photos related to the Chibok abduction anniversary, demanding more concrete action from the government. Comments often call for renewed international pressure on Boko Haram and better support for the affected families. And on Reddit's Rafrica subreddit, threads are discussing the UK aid cuts. Users are lamenting the likely impact on vital health and education programs across the continent, and some are accusing the UK government of prioritizing its own defense spending over humanitarian obligations.
What does this all mean about how domestic policy, like budgets and international aid decisions, impact daily lives and the public's perception of government? Just very clearly that citizens are acutely aware of how these decisions affect them directly, whether it's taxes, services, or foreign aid flows. And they increasingly use online platforms to hold their own governments and international partners accountable for delivering on promises of development, security, and basic fairness.
Right. In Latin America, on Twitter in Chile, users are debating the copper price forecast. The hashtag #CobrielaLaza, copper on the rise, is trending. Miners and related industries are cheering potentially higher revenues, while manufacturing sectors are warning online about rising input cost pressures. On WhatsApp in Brazil, voice notes and messages are reportedly circulating among legal experts and commentators discussing Brazil's intervention at the ICJ. Some believe it strengthens the country's moral standing on the world stage, while others express fear of economic retaliation from the U.S. And on Reddit's Our Mexico, posts are celebrating Beckle's huge profits, with plenty of jokes about tequila saving the national economy. Though a few users are raising concerns about the company's heavy reliance on U.S. sales, making it vulnerable to future trade disputes or downturns.
These conversations really show how global economic shifts, like commodity prices and major international legal actions like the ICJ case, actually trickle down into public discourse and even personal anxieties. Whether it's the price of copper, the cost of tequila, or a nation's diplomatic stance, people are connecting these high-level events to their personal livelihoods, their national pride, and sometimes doing it with a surprising blend of humor and genuine concern.
Definitely. Finally, for Oceania Pacific, on Twitter in Australia, there's a lively debate over the government lifting U.S. beef restrictions. Farmers are expressing worry about increased competition, while consumer groups are tentatively welcoming potentially lower prices. The hashtag beef deal is trending there. On LinkedIn, Australian professionals, particularly in the tech and logistics sectors, are discussing WiseTech's layoffs. The commentary reflects a broader acknowledgement of the tech sector's shift towards AI automation, with many comments emphasizing the need for reskilling and better support systems for affected workers. And on Twitter in New Zealand, users are generally celebrating the new space law as a necessary step for national security in a changing world. But some space enthusiasts and potential entrepreneurs are voicing fears online that the new regulations might stifle innovation in the country's nascent space industry.
What's fascinating here is how these technological advancements, AI, trade policies, beef imports, and national security measures, space law, are directly impacting conversations among professionals on platforms like LinkedIn and also among everyday citizens on Twitter. It highlights the direct relevance of these complex topics to personal careers, economic well-being, and national security concerns, sparking both excitement about new possibilities and real concern about the potential downsides and disruptions. Okay, now, this is where the deep dive truly earns its name. Nextsite doesn't just give us these individual pieces of the puzzle. They show us how they all fit together in a really powerful correlational analysis.
Exactly. If we connect this all back to the bigger picture, this correlational analysis helps us understand the interdependencies between these events. It reveals what these trends might imply for future risks and opportunities. It's about finding those invisible threads that tie seemingly disparate events together across the globe. Okay, starting with regional correlations. For North America, those record stock market highs we discussed directly correlate with the optimism surrounding trade negotiations. However, the likely introduction of 15% tariff baseline with the EU even if it's seen as a compromise, could still significantly dampen consumer spending and corporate earnings down the line. It's not cost-free. And the U.S. AI export plan, while clearly boosting chipmaker stocks right now, could also face significant legal challenges due to the environmental deregulation aspects, potentially delaying critical data center projects and facing public pushback.
So, what does this all mean for the fragility of that market optimism? It suggests that the current high is built, maybe precariously, on an anticipated positive outcome with trade deals. If that outcome is less favorable than hoped or significantly delayed, we could see a sharp market correction. Nextsite advises monitor the S&P 500 and key semiconductor indices very closely, and they prepare a Tier 1 alert if those tariffs aren't finalized near the 15% level by the deadline.
Right. In Europe, the euro's recent appreciation clearly reflects a strategic investor flight away from the U.S. dollar, driven by uncertainty about U.S. trade and fiscal policy. If Brussels successfully secures that 15% tariff cap, the euro could stabilize or even strengthen further. However, a failure in those critical talks would likely depress European stock markets significantly and almost certainly push the ECB toward additional interest rate cuts in an attempt to stimulate the potentially slowing economy.
This raises that important question again. How much sway do these trade negotiations truly hold over major global currencies and powerful central bank decisions? It appears quite a lot. The markets are hanging on every word. We should be tracking the USD exchange rate and yields on key Eurozone government bonds very closely. Nextsite would issue a Tier 1 escalation alert if these talks were to collapse, anticipating a significant market sell-off and potential currency turmoil.
For Asia, those border tensions we saw, like the one between Thailand and Cambodia and the alleged Chinese interference in Taiwan, could seriously unsettle regional supply chains and deter foreign investment if they escalate further. Investors hate uncertainty. Conversely, Pakistan's expressed readiness for dialogue with India, if it leads to genuine progress, however small, might actually improve South Asian market sentiment and potentially attract some cautious investment back into the region.
What's fascinating here is how these seemingly localized geopolitical events, a border skirmish, an election dispute, can have tangible ripple effects on regional economic flows and investor confidence. We need to monitor currencies like the Thai baht and the Taiwanese dollar for volatility. And Nextsite suggests considering hedging instruments for companies with significant supply chain or market exposure to Southeast Asia right now.
Good advice. In the Middle East, Gaza's ongoing humanitarian disaster is triggering widespread global condemnation and is very likely to galvanize further boycotts and divestment campaigns against Israel. This could impact its international standing and potentially its economy through reduced trade or tourism. The large Saudi investment flowing into Syria, on the other hand, signals a clear geopolitical realignment and presents potential opportunities for reconstruction firms and regional investors, despite the risks. Meanwhile, Turkey's Eurofighter purchase may well provide a boost to European defense stocks like BAE Systems or Airbus, reflecting broader shifts in regional military procurement away from sole reliance on the U.S.
Yeah, this really highlights the complex interplay between conflict, humanitarian crises, and shifting economic alliances in the region. It's all interconnected. We should definitely watch defense sector equities and Middle East-focused ETFs closely. Nextsite would issue a Tier 1 alert if Israel were to significantly escalate attacks in Gaza or elsewhere, as this could easily spike oil prices dramatically, impacting the global economy.
Absolutely. For Africa, that U.S. sanctions bill targeting South Africa, if it progresses further through Congress, is likely to weaken the South African rand and increase yields on South African government bonds, signaling rising investor concern about the country's economic outlook and political stability. Furthermore, the UK aid cuts, while perhaps seeming distant, will almost certainly reduce economic growth prospects and negatively impact healthcare outcomes in several African countries that were heavily reliant on that bilateral aid, potentially creating broader humanitarian challenges down the road.
So what does this all mean for the financial resilience of African nations facing these kinds of external pressures? It's a significant test, particularly for countries already dealing with debt or internal challenges. Nextsite actually recommends considering shorting the rand or buying credit default swaps on South African debt if the U.S. sanctions bill looks likely to pass. And generally, they advise monitoring commodity-linked African currencies for increased volatility.
In Latin America, Chile's higher copper price forecast suggests potential gains for copper miners and the Chilean treasury. But that volatility due to the U.S. tariffs remains a significant concern for stable planning. Brazil's intervention at the ICJ, while potentially straining trade ties with the U.S. further, may paradoxically enhance its diplomatic standing among BRICS nations and other countries in the Global South, positioning it as a leader on international law issues.
Yeah, this demonstrates that double-edged sword of global commodity demand great when prices are high, risky when volatile, and the complex calculations involved in geopolitical positioning. Taking a stand can have both costs and benefits. We need to track copper futures closely, as well as the Brazilian real. Next Site would issue Tier 2 alerts if the U.S. were to retaliate more strongly against Brazil economically, or if surging copper prices start to significantly affect global inflation metrics.
Good points. Finally, for Oceania Pacific, Australia's ongoing IACs payments and their adoption of new monthly CPI data are clearly influencing defense contractor stocks and government bond yields, signaling shifts in national priorities and economic monitoring. The WiseTech layoffs, explicitly driven by AI automation, are a clear signal of a sector-wide pivot towards AI, not just in Australia, but globally. And New Zealand's new space law, while aimed at national security, could also affect investment decisions in the aerospace and satellite communication sectors.
What stands out to you about how technology, AI, defense, AUKUS, and economic transparency, CPI data, are shaping the region? It's clear that these areas are rapidly converging, forcing countries like Australia and New Zealand to adapt quickly. It reveals how deeply intertwined national policy decisions are now, with global technological shifts, defense alignments, and international economic standards.
Definitely converging. Now let's zoom out one last time to the global correlations. 3 big ones stand out from this report.
Okay, hit me first.
First, trade tensions and commodity prices. It's clear that rising tariffs have, counterintuitively in some cases, lifted prices for commodities like copper and oil, while simultaneously depressing demand for others like steel. The failure to secure comprehensive, stable trade deals risks spiking commodity volatility even further and could lead to dramatic currency swings between major economies, directly affecting global inflation across the board.
Yeah, this is a crucial feedback loop. How does this cyclical pattern of tariffs, commodity reactions, and currency swings impact your purchasing power, listening out there? It means that seemingly distant trade disputes happening in Brussels or Washington can quickly become a silent tax on almost every aspect of your daily spending, from food to fuel to electronics. Next Site advises companies to hedge their commodity exposures and monitor foreign exchange markets vigilantly for sudden shifts.
Second global correlation, the AI boom versus the labor market. The U.S. AI export plan aiming to boost the industry, combined with corporate automation strategies like we saw with WiseTech, clearly reflect a powerful global trend. Technology investments are boosting corporate profits and efficiency, but often at the direct cost of displacing human workers in certain roles. This dynamic could very well stoke social unrest and trigger a regulatory backlash as governments grapple with protecting jobs and managing the societal transition.
Yeah, this raises that fundamental question for our time. How do we balance the undeniable benefits of technological progress with societal well-being and basic job security for millions of people? It's a massive challenge with no easy answers. Next Site recommends investing in AI-focused firms, sure, but critically, also diversifying into sectors focused on worker retraining and education for the jobs of the future. They even suggest a Tier 2 alert watch for potential labor disputes linked to automation as this trend accelerates globally.
And finally, the third overarching theme, climate-driven instability. The devastating wildfires in Turkey, the humanitarian crises exacerbated by drought or resource scarcity like we see in Gaza, and the tragic plane crash linked potentially to extreme weather in Bangladesh. These events clearly demonstrate how climate change is not just an environmental issue. It's a critical exacerbator of existing conflicts, resource scarcities, and human vulnerabilities. The scary part, as mentioned, is that financial markets may still be significantly underpricing these fundamental systemic risks associated with climate change.
What's fascinating, and maybe urgent, here is the clear need for a more holistic approach to global risk assessment. We need to integrate climate considerations into every strategic decision, whether it's business investment, national security, or international relations. This means strengthening ESG environmental, social, governance screening and investment portfolios, perhaps considering insurance and disaster recovery-related stocks. Next Site even suggests a Tier 1 alert if severe weather events, like hurricanes or floods, significantly disrupt major global shipping lanes, which could have immediate cascading global economic consequences. Wow, okay. You've just been on a pretty intense deep dive into some of the most critical intelligence from around the world, courtesy of Next Site. What really stands out to you, Cocky, after processing all this information?
Well, today's intelligence brief really paints a vivid, if somewhat sobering picture of a world that is deeply interconnected. We see connections through trade, through technology, but also through these escalating humanitarian and climate challenges. The nuances in each regional report, the specific details, they really show us that global events are rarely, if ever, truly isolated anymore. They ripple across borders, impacting economies, societies, and individual lives in incredibly complex and often unpredictable ways.
Indeed. From the delicate, high-stakes dance of international tariffs and their impact on your shopping basket, to the profound, often tragic human stories behind the headlines, it's crystal clear that staying informed isn't just about knowing the facts anymore. It's about understanding that intricate, invisible web that connects us all, for better or for worse. So, as we consider these complex global dynamics, from AI's dual promise and potential threat, to the ripple effects of every single tariff decision, every climate event, maybe think about this. In a world absolutely drowning in information, where genuine understanding often feels scarce, how will you leverage insights like these to make sense of the signals around you? How can you use this knowledge to contribute, even in a small way, to navigating the bigger picture? Do not forget to follow us on YouTube and like, share, and comment below. We do look forward to hearing your opinion. This is it for today. Enjoy your day.